In the quiet suburbs of a bustling city stood a mansion that housed a story of love twisted by possession. Within its walls lived Idara, a young woman whose life had been shaped by two profound events: the death of her mother and the unwavering devotion of her father. The first she couldn't remember, the second she couldn't live without. Her father, known to his congregation as deacon, carried the weight of both parent roles with a grace that masked his own grief. What few knew was that every time he looked at his daughter, he saw echoes of his late wife, the same determined set of her jaw, the same flash of intensity in her eyes. These resemblances were both a blessing and a quiet torment, though he never let Idara see his pain. Their relationship flourished in this carefully maintained bubble of mutual devotion. Deacon provided everything his daughter could want or need, from the finest education to the most fashionable clothes. But more importantly, he gave her his time, endless hours spent in conversation, shared meals, and quiet companionship. In return, Idara gave him her complete adoration, building her entire world around their special bond. What neither of them recognized was how this perfect arrangement had planted seeds of possessiveness in Idara's heart. Like ivy growing around a tree, her love for her father grew both stronger and more constrictive with each passing year. She watched him with the vigilance of a guardian, noting every smile, every gesture, every moment of attention he gave to others. In her mind, their relationship wasn't just special, it was sacred, exclusive, and absolutely irreplaceable. The true test of this carefully constructed world came when Idara gained admission to university. The campus lay 2 hours away, a distance that might seem trivial to some, but to Idara, it felt like an ocean of separation. She stood in her room, surrounded by half-packed boxes, fighting back tears as she contemplated the impending change. Education is the key to your future, Deacon had told her, his voice firm but gentle, the same tone he used in his Sunday sermons. What he didn't say, what he couldn't know, was that this moment would mark the beginning of a destructive pattern in their lives. The day of departure arrived with the weight of inevitability. Idara hugged her father tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the leather of his Bible cover. "I'll visit often," he promised, his words a balm to her anxious heart. "Every weekend if you need me to." As Idara drove away, watching her father's figure grow smaller in the rearview mirror, she felt the first real fracture in their perfect world. What neither of them could have predicted was how this small crack would eventually spiderweb into a complex pattern of manipulation, jealousy, and desperate attempts to preserve what she believed was slipping away. In the months that followed, Idara threw herself into university life with determined enthusiasm, making new friends and excelling in her studies. Yet beneath this veneer of adaptation, her thoughts constantly returned home. She called her father daily, scheduled regular video chats, and counted the days until her visits. Her new friends noticed this preoccupation, but attributed it to the normal homesickness of a devoted daughter. Little did they know that back in her dorm room, Idira had created a shrine of sorts. Photos of her and her father covered one wall, each image a snapshot of their exclusive world. She would often sit on her bed, staring at these images, planning their next weekend together, completely unaware that her father was slowly beginning to consider the possibility of finding companionship again. The universe, with its cruel sense of timing, waited until Idara had finally settled into her new routine before delivering its first real blow. It came in the form of a weekend visit home, an eagerly anticipated return that would shatter her carefully maintained illusion of unchanging love. The mansion looked exactly as Idara remembered it, its familiar facade promising the comfort of unchanged routines and exclusive affection. But the universe had other plans, and they arrived wearing a floral dress and a welcoming smile that made Idara's stomach turn. "Hello. You must be Idara." The stranger said, standing in what Idara considered her domain, her father's living room. The woman's voice was warm honey, but to Idara's ears, it dripped with invasion. "Your father has told me so much about you." The words hit Idara like physical blows. "Your father has told me," each word a betrayal, each syllable a crack in her perfect world. She stood frozen in the doorway, her weekend bag still clutched in her hand, as her father appeared behind him, his face alight with an enthusiasm that felt like treachery. Idara. Welcome home, sweetheart. Deacon moved forward to embrace his daughter, seemingly blind to the storm brewing behind her carefully composed expression. In that moment, Idara made a choice that would set in motion a chain of events she couldn't possibly foresee. She smiled. It wasn't just any smile. It was a masterpiece of deception, a perfect mask that concealed the typhoon of emotions churning beneath. How wonderful to meet you, Ma, she heard herself say, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Her father beamed, interpreting her response as maturity, acceptance, everything he had hoped for. What followed was a masterclass in manipulation. Idar watched with the patience of a predator studying its prey. She learned MM's habits, her mannerisms, the little routines she was trying to establish in their home. She noted how she placed her coffee cup on the kitchen counter each morning, how she organized her belongings in the guest room, how she laughed at her father's jokes with what Idara considered unnecessary enthusiasm. Most importantly, Idara observed how she kept her most precious belongings, including a delicate gold bracelet her grandmother had given her, in a small jewelry box on the dresser. The same dresser where, coincidentally, Deacon had begun keeping some of his own valuables, a sign of trust that made Idara's blood boil. The plan formed in Idara's mind like a photograph developing in darkroom chemicals, becoming clearer and more defined with each passing hour. She bided her time, playing the role of the supportive daughter, even sitting through evening television sessions where dared to sit next to her father on what had always been Idara's spot on the couch. You're such a blessing, I told her one evening, reaching out to touch Idara's hand. I was so worried you might resent my presence here. The irony of the moment almost made Idara laugh. Instead, she squeezed MM's hand reassuringly, all while calculating the perfect moment to strike. That moment came on a Sunday morning, when the house was filled with the aroma of MM's cooking. Another invasion, another attempt to carve out a place in their lives. Idara waited until M was busy in the kitchen, then slipped into her father's study. With surgical precision, she selected several small items from his desk. A gold pen he rarely used, a pair of cufflinks tucked away in a drawer, and a small envelope containing emergency cash. The items found their new home in MM's jewelry box, carefully placed beneath her own belongings. Idara then retreated to her room, heart pounding not with fear, but with anticipation. She waited, counting the minutes, until her father's voice shattered the Sunday morning peace. Could you come here for a moment? Idara could hear the confusion in MM's voice as she responded, could picture the innocent expression on her face as she walked into the trap. The confrontation that followed was everything Idara had hoped for. Her father's angry accusations, MM's desperate denials, the tears, the pleading, the final decisive moment when Deacon, hurt and disappointed, asked him to leave. Through it all, Idara played her part perfectly. She stood by her father's side, offering comfort and support, while inside she savored each moment of MM's destruction. When the front door finally closed behind him for the last time, Idara felt a surge of triumph that scared her a little with its intensity. That night, as she sat with her father in their once again exclusive living room, Idara watched him stare into his evening tea with sad eyes. A twinge of guilt tried to surface, but she pushed it down, telling herself she had done what was necessary. After all, hadn't things been perfect before M arrived? Wouldn't they be perfect again? What Idara didn't realize, as she basked in her victory, was that she had just taken the first step down a path that would eventually lead to her own undoing. The ease of this first success, the intoxicating feeling of power it brought, had awakened something in her that would demand increasingly dramatic measures to satisfy its hunger for control. The mansion settled into its familiar rhythms again, but something had changed. Like a lock that's been picked, the sanctity of their exclusive world had been compromised. Idara knew now that it could happen again, that her father might once more try to bring someone else into their lives. But she also knew, with a certainty that should have frightened her, that she would be ready if he did. Time has a way of healing wounds, but it can also mask festering darkness. In the months following MM's departure, Deacon's sadness gradually faded, replaced by a loneliness that Idara either couldn't or wouldn't see. She had settled back into her routine of weekend visits and daily calls, secure in the belief that their exclusive world was safe once more. But loneliness, like water, finds its way through even the smallest cracks. It was during a routine business consultation that Deacon met UK, a woman whose professional demeanor and gentle wisdom sparked something in him that he hadn't felt since MM's departure. UK was different. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth, and her credentials as a successful business consultant added a layer of respectability that even Idara would have to acknowledge. Or so Deacon thought. When he introduced UK to Idara, his daughter's welcome was so warm it could have melted ice. I've heard wonderful things about your work, Idara said, her smile dazzling. UK, touched by what seemed like genuine interest, didn't notice how Idara's eyes never quite matched her smile's warmth. Deacon watched their interaction with relief, believing that his daughter had truly matured during her time at university. He couldn't see the calculations running behind Idara's eyes, couldn't know that she was already cataloging UK's weaknesses, searching for pressure points that could be exploited. The opportunity presented itself when UK decided to spend a few days at their home. It was a natural progression of her relationship with Deacon, but to Adora, it was an invasion that required a more sophisticated response than her previous intervention. UK was too established, too respected for a simple theft accusation. This would require something more intimate. Late one night, while the house slept, Adora moved through the darkness like a shadow. Her target, UK's suitcase, carefully placed in the guest room. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, seeking and finding what she needed. A pair of clean, neatly folded underwear. In her hands, this innocent item of clothing would become a weapon of destruction. The septic tank behind their house had always been a source of necessary evil, its contents toxic and foul. As Idris stood over it in the moonlight, the underwear dangling from a stick she'd found in the garden, she felt a moment of disconnect, as if she were watching someone else carry out this elaborate scheme. But the thought of UK at breakfast that morning, sitting in her mother's old seat, sharing private smiles with her father, hardened her resolve. The underwear descended into the septic tank, emerging saturated with a stench that would make its way through the entire house. Idara handled it with gloved hands, rinsing it just enough to make the smell less immediately obvious, but ensuring it retained its toxic payload. With surgical precision, she placed it in a bucket in her father's bathroom, knowing his morning routine would lead him straight to it. Dawn broke over the mansion, painting the sky in innocent pinks and golds that belied the drama about to unfold. Idara lay in her bed, counting down the seconds, waiting for the inevitable explosion. When it came, it exceeded even her expectations. "Are you a pig?" Her father's voice thundered through the house, carrying a disgust that made Idara's heart race with dark satisfaction. She could hear Yuki's confused protests, the horror in her voice as she confronted the evidence, and her father's cutting dismissal of every explanation. But it was Yuki's tears that provided the sweetest victory. The sound of her dignity crumbling, her professional composure shattering in the face of such a primal humiliation, was music to Idara's ears. When she finally emerged from her room, playing the role of the confused and concerned daughter, she found UK hastily packing her belongings, her face streaked with mascara-stained tears. "Father, what's happened?" Idara asked, her voice pitched perfectly between concern and disgust as she waved her hand in front of her nose. "Did something die in here?" Deacon, his face red with anger and embarrassment, could barely look at UK as she fled the house. His shame at having brought such a woman into their home was palpable, and Adara moved quickly to comfort him, to reassure him that he deserved better, that one day he would find someone worthy of their family. What neither of them could see was the dark satisfaction that danced behind Idara's sympathetic expression. She had evolved in her methods, becoming more sophisticated, more brutal in her elimination of threats to her perfect world. The ease with which she had orchestrated UK's downfall should have worried her, but instead, it filled her with a sense of power that would prove dangerously addictive. As she helped her father air out the house, removing all traces of UK's presence and the lingering evidence of her scheme, Idar failed to recognize that she was crossing lines that could never be uncrossed. Each successful manipulation was leading her down a path of escalating cruelty, building toward a confrontation that would eventually shatter the very relationship she was so desperately trying to protect. But for now, she basked in her victory, secure in her father's exclusive attention once more. The mansion settled back into its familiar rhythms, though something darker now lurked beneath its peaceful facade. A daughter's love twisted into something possessive and toxic, waiting for the next threat to eliminate. They say that pride comes before a fall, but no one ever mentions how pride blinds you to the edge of the cliff you're approaching. For Idara, that blindness came in the form of overconfidence, born from two successful campaigns to protect her perfect world. She had become so assured in her ability to remove unwanted additions to their lives that she never considered she might meet her match. Aitong entered their lives like a breath of fresh air, or perhaps more accurately, like a gentle breeze that precedes a storm. She met Deacon outside his favorite barber shop, their paths crossing with the kind of perfect timing that might have seemed romantic to anyone else. To Adara, it was simply another threat to eliminate, albeit one that presented itself differently from the start. Worm had been warm but naive, and UK professional but vulnerable. Aitong carried herself with an unshakable self-possession that Idara found immediately unsettling. When their eyes first met during the introduction, Aitong's calm, knowing gaze seemed to pierce straight through Idara's practiced smile, as if reading the storm brewing behind her facade. "I've heard so much about you, Idara," Aitong said, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been understanding or warning. "And I've heard about you too," Idara replied, her sugary tone masking the bitter taste in her mouth. But unlike her previous victims, Aitong didn't seem satisfied with surface pleasantries. She watched Idara with the patient attention of someone who had experience reading between lines and seeing through masks. Idara's first attempt at sabotage came in the form of her most ambitious scheme yet. Late one night, she crept into her father's room with a calabash wrapped in red cloth, carefully placing it under his desk along with his photograph and other items meant to suggest dark practices. It was a plan designed to play on superstitions and fears, to paint Aitong as someone dabbling in forces best left untouched. But when morning came, it was Idara who found herself exposed. Her father confronted her not with accusations against Aitong, but with something far more damaging: photographs of Idara herself at a club, dancing provocatively with strangers, a bottle of alcohol in her hand. The evidence of her secret life at university lay spread across his desk like cards in a losing hand. "Is this what I sent you to university for?" Deacon's voice carried a disappointment that cut deeper than anger ever could. The calabash was nowhere to be found, and in its absence, Idara felt the first real stirring of fear. Somehow, Aitong had not only avoided her trap, but had managed to turn it back on her. The quiet smile Aitong gave her later that day spoke volumes about who really held the upper hand. But Idara wasn't finished. Her next attempt came through the kitchen, that domestic battlefield where she had previously orchestrated UK's downfall. While Aitong prepared dinner one evening, Idara seized her chance to pour an excessive amount of salt into the stew, enough to make it inedible. It was a simple plan, designed to embarrass Aitong and demonstrate her inadequacy in caring for Deacon's needs. The dinner that followed became a masterclass in outmaneuvering. While Deacon praised the perfectly seasoned food on his plate, Idara found herself choking down mouthfuls of nearly pure salt. Across the table, Aitong's serene expression never wavered, but her eyes held a mixture of challenge and something that looked uncomfortably like pity. Desperation began to set in, pushing Idara toward her most dangerous gambit yet. During her careful surveillance of her new enemy, she had discovered something that seemed like providence: Aitong's health card revealing her asthmatic condition, the same condition that had claimed Idara's mother's life, a fact that Idara knew would devastate her father if revealed. The plan crystallized in her mind with terrible clarity. A candle left burning in her father's bedroom, carefully placed to ensure its smoke would trigger Aitong's condition. It was meant to be a controlled revelation, a way to expose Aitong's weakness without causing real harm. But fate has a way of punishing those who play with fire. What Idara hadn't counted on was the sudden gust of wind through an open window, the curtain's deadly dance with the flame, the speed with which fire could transform from tool to terror. She had already left the house when the first wisps of smoke turned to roaring flames. unaware that her father would rush into the inferno to save the very woman she had tried to drive away. The call came from an unknown number. Her father had been rushed to the hospital with severe burns, sustained while shielding Itong from the flames. As Adora raced to the hospital, her carefully constructed world was already crumbling around her, burning away like the walls of their home. In the sterile hospital corridor, facing her father's bandaged form and Itong's knowing gaze, Adora finally confronted the monster she had become. The smell of smoke still clung to her clothes, but it was nothing compared to the stench of her guilt, the crushing weight of consequences she had never meant to create. Why? Her father asked, his voice rough from smoke inhalation, his eyes filled with a pain that went far deeper than his physical wounds. Why did you do this to us? The question hung in the air like smoke, demanding an answer that would strip away the last of Idara's carefully maintained pretenses. As she looked between her injured father and the woman who had survived all her schemes, Idara realized that the perfect world she had fought so hard to protect had been destroyed not by others, but by her own possessive love. In that moment, under the harsh hospital lights, surrounded by the consequences of her actions, Idara finally began to understand the true cost of her obsession. The path to redemption would be long and painful, but it would begin here, in this moment of complete honesty, as she prepared to confess not just this last terrible act, but all the manipulations that had led to it. In the aftermath of flames and revelation, truth has a way of burning brighter than any fire. As Adara stood in that sterile hospital room, the weight of her confessions pressed down on her like lead. Each admission, MM's false theft, UK's orchestrated humiliation, the calculated attacks against Itong, fell from her lips like drops of poison finally being drawn from a wound. I just wanted things to stay the same, she whispered, her voice breaking. Just you and me, father. Like it always was. Deacon lay in his hospital bed, his bandaged hands resting on the stark white sheets, his burned face a map of pain both physical and emotional. The silence that followed Idara's confession seemed to stretch into infinity, broken only by the steady beep of medical monitors and the distant sounds of hospital life continuing beyond their private drama. The same, he finally repeated, the words coming out as a tired sigh. But nothing stays the same, Idara. Life moves forward, changes, grows. I thought I had taught you that. From her bed across the room, Itong watched this exchange with eyes that held neither triumph nor condemnation, but rather a deep understanding that made Idara's shame burn even hotter. Love is not a finite resource, Itong said softly, her voice still raspy from smoke inhalation. It multiplies when shared, like light reflecting off mirrors. The wisdom in those words cut through years of Idara's carefully constructed defenses. She remembered how she had once sat in psychology lectures at university, learning about attachment and fear, while secretly plotting ways to maintain her grip on her father's affection. The irony of it struck her now with devastating clarity. Days turned into weeks, and the hospital room became a crucible of transformation. While her father's burns slowly healed, Idara began her own healing journey. She started seeing a therapist, Dr. Chen, who helped her unravel the complex knot of fears and needs that had driven her to such destructive behavior. Your mother's death left a void, Dr. Chen observed during one session, and you tried to fill it by becoming not just a daughter, but a guardian of your father's love. But in trying to protect that love, you nearly destroyed it. The hardest part came when Idara decided to make amends with those she had wronged. She tracked down first, finding her working at a local charity organization. The meeting was awkward, filled with long silences and painful memories. I don't expect forgiveness, Idara said, her hands wrapped tightly around a cold cup of coffee. I just want you to know the truth. The theft, it was all me. You didn't deserve what I did to you. Lim's response surprised her. I knew, she said simply. Not at first, but later, I figured it out. I've been waiting for this conversation. UK proved harder to find, having moved to another city after the incident. When Idora finally reached her through social media, the business consultant's professional demeanor cracked just slightly at the sound of Idora's voice. Do you know how long it took me to rebuild my confidence after what you did? UK asked, her words sharp but controlled. Some days, I still catch myself checking my clothing multiple times before leaving my house. Each confession, each acknowledgement of harm done, felt like climbing a mountain of glass. But with every step, every shard of truth that cut into her, Idara felt herself growing stronger, more real. Back at the hospital, Itong's presence became an unexpected source of guidance. She shared stories of her own struggles with jealousy and fear in her youth, how she had learned to transform those emotions into understanding and strength. The heart is not a prison, Itong told her one evening, as they sat watching Deacon sleep. It's a garden. The more you tend it, the more it grows. As her father's discharge date approached, Idara faced the challenge of rebuilding their home, both physically and emotionally. The fire damage had been extensive, requiring major renovations. But in the destruction, there was also opportunity for renewal. We could change the layout, her father suggested during one planning session, his healing hands tracing new possibilities on the blueprints. Make room for more people in our lives. The words would have once sent Idara into a spiral of possessive panic. Now, they sparked a different kind of anxiety, the healthy kind that comes with growth and change. She found herself nodding, even suggesting an expanded dining room for family dinners. The months that followed tested Idara's commitment to change in ways both large and small. She learned to sit with the discomfort of seeing her father's attention divided, to recognize that his happiness with Itong didn't diminish his love for her. She discovered that letting go didn't mean losing everything. It meant making room for more. During the renovation of their home, workers discovered an old photo album in a partially burned cabinet. Inside, miraculously preserved, was a picture of Idara's mother holding her as a newborn, her father standing proudly beside them. The joy in her mother's eyes, even as she struggled with the illness that would soon take her life, spoke volumes about the true nature of love. Your mother's last words were about love, her father shared, touching the photograph gently. She made me promise to teach you that love grows stronger when it's shared freely. Idara traced her mother's smile in the photograph, understanding for the first time that she had been running from a ghost, trying to fill a space that was never meant to be filled in quite the way she had attempted. As their home was rebuilt, so too was their family, expanded now to include not just Itong, but also the possibility of other connections, other relationships, other ways of loving. The mansion that had once felt like a fortress protecting their exclusive world now became a place of welcome, its doors open to the kind of love that multiplies rather than divides. And Idara, watching her father's happiness bloom in this new reality, finally understood that the perfect world she had tried so desperately to preserve had never been perfect at all. True perfection lay in the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of love that grows, changes, and expands to embrace all the possibilities that life offers.